In this episode of Bee Hooked Knitting, we're going to knit the Cutie Pie headband. My name is Brittany and I'll be your guide throughout this tutorial. For the supplies list and written instructions for this pattern, please visit knitting.beehookedcrochet.com/cutiepie. Let's begin. To begin our headbands, we're going to want to gather up a long tail. We're going to do the long tail cast on. I would suggest just a couple of feet that you'll need, since we're not going to be casting on a large number of stitches. There are two sizes to this pattern. We're going to be working on the smaller of the two. So you'll just place that loop just right over your needle. So I have my tail at one end, my working yarn from the other. We're going to take our thumb and our index finger and just put them in the middle of those two strands. So just like this, gather them up down at the bottom and spread your fingers. Now you'll want to hold on to this loop on your needle or it will fall off. You're going to bring your needle around and grab that loop on your thumb. Then work your needle around and grab the loop on your index finger. Now you'll release your thumb over the tip of the needle and then just tighten things up. So now we have 2 stitches on our needle. For the smaller of the two patterns, we want to have 16. So we'll just repeat that several more times. Once you've cast on the proper number of stitches as indicated by the pattern and the size that you're creating, the first row we're going to knit every stitch, and I'm going to demonstrate in a couple different ways. There are 2 ways that you can hold your needles, and if you're a beginner knitter, as I assume you probably are if you're watching this beginner tutorial, then you can either hold the working yarn in your dominant hand or your non-dominant hand. And it's all a matter of personal preference, how you started, and probably who taught you how to knit. That's going to be what's going to decide for you which method you prefer. And I'm going to first demonstrate the American knitting style, and that's where you're going to hold your working yarn in your dominant hand. So I mentioned row 1, we're going to knit every stitch. So we'll just insert our needle knitwise. And I'm just going to gather up my working yarn, wrap the needle, and then pull it through. And you'll just do that for every stitch. Insert knitwise, wrap your yarn, pull it through. On row 2, we're going to knit the first and the last stitch, and every stitch in between is going to be a purl. The reason why we're going to have a knit stitch on either side is to help control the roll that you tend to get with the stockinette stitch, which is the stitch pattern we'll be working with throughout this design. So I'll insert my needle knitwise to knit the first stitch. And now you're going to need to pull your working yarn to the front since we're doing purls, so you'll just pull it over just like that and insert your needle purlwise. So in this direction here. Then you'll just wrap the yarn to purl. Now when you have just one stitch remaining on your non-dominant needle, so on that opposite side there, we're going to just flip our working yarn back to the back and then we'll knit the last stitch. So we've just completed the entire stitch pattern repeat for this design. It's really simple. What you're looking at here is the wrong side of the work. So every time you work an even row or a purl row, you know that's the wrong side of the headband. So once we finish up that, we'll just flip our work. And now, as I promised, I'm going to demonstrate how to knit this repeat in the continental style, which is where we hold the working yarn in our non-dominant hand. And people who typically crochet before they knit, this is usually the style that they're most comfortable knitting in. So row 1, we're just going to knit every stitch. So I'm still just going to insert my needle knitwise. Even when I'm knitting in the continental style, I typically always knit that first stitch with my dominant hand. It's just easier to get things going. Now we'll just gather up the yarn in our non-dominant hand. And to do the continental knit stitch, we're still going to insert our needle knitwise. But we're just going to make sure that working yarn is available to just grab and pull it through the loop. And then we'll just slide it off. Then from here, we'll just turn our work. And now we're going to work our row 2 of our pattern repeat. So this is our purl row, but we are going to start with knit stitches. So we'll knit the first stitch, and then we want to purl all of the stitches until we get to the last one. So how would we do a continental purl? We still need to have our working yarn in the front. So you can see it's oriented now in front of my needle. I need to get this yarn out of the way before I insert my needle purlwise into that next stitch. If we insert our needle beforehand, well, we can't really wrap it, but we'll also increase, and we don't want that either. So we'll just use these 2 fingers here to push the working yarn down, insert your needle purlwise, and then release and press it down again. That's going to wrap it, and then just finish your stitch. And the purl stitch is completely backwards, just the exact opposite of the knit stitch. That's what makes it a little more tricky to work. Honestly, I find that I knit more in the American style nowadays, but I do prefer the continental purl. I find this just a little bit easier for me. And you just continue purling until you reach that last stitch. And then we want to knit the very last stitch. So I just went ahead and moved my working yarn to the back side of this needle here. And then we'll just insert our needle knitwise, grab the working yarn, and pull through. So at this point, all we need to do is knit the bulk of our headbands, and it's really simple. There's only a couple things that we need to do after we finish knitting to finish things up. If you're working on this smaller size as I am here, you're going to knit until your piece measures 13 inches from this bottom line here all the way to where you stop. You want that to be 13 inches. And if you're working on the larger size, you can find the information on that pattern in the link below this video, and you can refer to that to get the length that you need for that size. Now, once you've finished knitting the length of your headband, we're ready now to bind off. And what we want to do to bind off, we're just going to do the simple bind off method. We'll knit the first stitch. We'll knit the second stitch. And then we're going to pass that first stitch over that last one. Now we'll knit the next stitch and then pass the first over that last. And we'll just repeat that until we only have one loop remaining on our needle. Now once you've reached that last stitch, then we can go ahead and trim our working yarn. And then just pull that tail through that loop. Now you've probably noticed that your headband is really wanting to curl. It's wanting to curl on the inside here and even a little bit on the sides. What I'm going to show you now is a technique that's going to help stretch out the stitches. It'll relax the fibers, and it's going to control this roll a little bit better. This is a wet blocking technique, and I highly recommend it for any and every project that you can block. This is definitely going to improve the overall look of your work. So what I've done here is I have these are actual blocking boards from Hephaestus Crafts. I will have a link to this product. I purchased mine from Amazon, and you can find that link at the pattern page for this pattern and tutorial. So I have these blocks here. You don't necessarily have to have them. If you have some athletic flooring tiles or that like foam tile that maybe your kids have, that works really great. What you need is a surface that is waterproof, because we're going to, once we pin this down, we're going to fully saturate it with water and then just let it dry overnight. You'll need some pins. I just have some standard sewing pins, but sometimes you may want to purchase a heavy-duty pin. There are specific pins for blocking, but once again, they're not really needed. And what I have done here is I have stretched my headband out. Now, it doesn't all fit in the frame here, but I've stretched it out about an inch extra on the vertical and the horizontal. So if you were to measure this before stretching it out, before blocking it, it's about 3 inches wide, and it's about 13 inches long. But in order for blocking to really do its job, you have to stretch the stitches out, and that's going to get them to relax. So I have stretched it out. Each one of these blocks is 1 inch, so I've stretched it out 4 blocks wide and 14 blocks long. And once you do that, all you're going to do is just pin the edges, and you want to make sure you're pulling out the roll as you go. And this is where these particular blocking boards come in real handy, because it does have the guides that you can go off of. Then once you get the entire thing pinned down, you're just going to take a spray bottle. I have just some regular lukewarm tap water in here. And then you're just going to spray the entire thing. You want to get it fully saturated. Now, once you have that fully saturated, you're just going to let it sit overnight. There are quicker methods to letting this dry, but really it doesn't get the job done quite as well as if you just let it go. You can use a blow dryer on a really low setting, and of course don't get the heat too close to the yarn. You can dry it out that way, and you'll get some results from that, but it's not going to be as good as if you just let it go overnight and allow it to dry on its own. So once we allow this to dry, we'll come back to the video. There is just a couple things left that we need to do. We're going to sew up the ends, and then we're going to add that cute little button. Now that we've wet blocked, you can really see the difference that it makes. You saw how curled it was trying to be in our previous section, and now that it's fully dried, you can see that it wants to lay flat, and that's why I'm such a big advocate for wet blocking. Now we just have to do a couple of things to assemble our headband. So you just want to fold it in half with the right sides facing each other. And with one of the long tails that you left, you'll just thread that on a darning needle. Now we don't have to be too particular about how we stitch this together because it's going to be underneath the button. So this is where the headband is going to gather up. So if it's less than pretty, it's really not a big deal. There's some really cool stitching techniques that you can use that'll have invisible seams, and we just don't really need to do that unless it's something you're comfortable with. So what I'm going to do is just find the stitch that's farthest over to that corner and just thread my needle through that. And I like to work with the whip stitch when I'm not really trying to be perfect because it's just a really easy stitch that we can do. And so you'll just whip stitch across the headband. Then once you've sewn all the way through your seam, then we can just turn it over. And as you can see, it's not an invisible seam, but I'm not too worried about that. Now we're ready to grab our buttons and put that together. Now since I have these two ends here, I'm going to use this to my advantage so I don't have to grab another scrap piece of yarn. But if your ends are a little too short for what we're going to do here, then you can just grab a scrap piece. You'll just weave these in along the back side of the work. What I want to do is take one of the ends, I'm just going to take the longest one, and run it underneath the headband so that I have one coming from each side. And then we'll just tie these together. And you'll want to situate it as you do that. So we don't want the wrong side to be showing. So I'm just going to tuck those corners in. Now that's the basic shape. If you didn't have a button or if you choose not to put a button on at this point, you could really just leave it go the way it is here. You would just, of course, weave in these tails and you'd have a really cute headband. But we're going to take it one step further and add this little button in the center. Then once you get your button sewn on, we'll just turn it inside out once again. I'm going to take this tail and just tie it off with my button strand. And then you can just trim off those edges. And that completes our headband. I hope you had so much fun knitting your first headband or one of your first headbands. And I'd really love to see pictures of your work. So if you are active on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, share your pictures with me. You can find me at BeHookedKnitting on all 3 of those platforms, or you can use hashtag BeHookedKnitting. I go through those hashtags daily so I can see your work and comment and like and interact with you that way. If you've enjoyed this tutorial or any of my other tutorials, I do ask that maybe you share this with a friend. Maybe you know somebody who is expecting a baby or knows somebody who is and might benefit from this tutorial as well. So if you enjoyed it, share this video with one of your friends and maybe click that like button. Thank you so much on behalf of BeHookedKnitting. My name is Brittany and I can't wait to serve you in the next episode.